Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show here on YouTube. New episodes air every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time with individual interviews posted throughout the following week. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So without further ado, let's get it on. Welcome all you citizens of the world. It's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is for the week of June 29th, and we are recording it on Tuesday, June 25th. A couple of things to mention at the top of the show. This is Pride weekend here in Chicago and around the world, probably around the country. Hundreds of thousands of folks are going to head to the streets, many on the north side, to watch the Chicago Pride Parade. There'll be a lot of parking bans, those kind of things you got to pay attention to. Chicago officials have somewhat reversed course after announcing scaled back plans for this year's Pride Parade. I did talk to our state rep, Kelly Cassidy, and she was pretty concerned about the moves the mayor had made. But in a later report from NBC, I read that Johnson's office has now accepted and changed the number of entries to 150. They had cut it to 125, which is still lower than in typical previous years. This is good. Everybody should have a good time. And, we've made a lot of advances, but we certainly have seen a kickback all around the nation, not only around gay marriage, but about trans youth, et cetera, et cetera. That's something we're going to get into next week. I think with our guest will be our state rep, Kelly Cassidy. And on the good front, in addition to that, off of a bad thing that happened in 1964, it'll be 60 years this Friday, 3 civil rights workers were killed in Mississippi. And it really shook up those of us who were paying attention, and I think to the nation. There was a movie that came out called Mississippi Burning, which, kind of was a Hollywood version. But it's only in recent years that the town of Philadelphia has really come to grips with it. And they've had events with Black, white, and Choctaw people. There is a Black mayor. And I think it's important that people really realize the climate that we had, given that we have a negative climate brewing here on many fronts. Know your history. And to that end, our first guest will be Professor Euan Hague from DePaul, someone I work with closely and I'm very glad to know. And we will be right back with our conversation with Professor Hague, also known as Euan, in just a moment. We're going to have a short musical break. So take it away, Engineer Hal, and everyone else, all you citizens of the world, stay close. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of June 29th. And I'm really glad to bring on our next guest. It's someone I met back in the day when we were running the Heartland Cafe up here in Rogers Park. He and his family would come for breakfast. We had him on the show way back when. And he at one point invited me to teach a class at DePaul, which I've been doing side by side with Euan Hague for 10 years now. And we talk about organizing from the 60s on with Black Panthers, Young Lords, et cetera, et cetera. And Euan Hague is a wonderful guy with a lot of information. He is the Vincent DePaul Professor of Geography at DePaul University and currently is the director of the School of Public Service. That's a lot for a guy to handle, and I've asked him to come on today to talk about civil rights and history here in Chicago. As you all might have recognized at the top of the show, I talked about 60 years ago, we had 3 civil rights workers killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi. It shook the nation. And here in Chicago, we had a member of the Black Panther Party, a couple members, Chairman Fred Hampton, were also killed many years later. But Euan has just come back from a tour with members of the Black Panther Party, reliving and noting some of the history around the Black Panther Party and civil rights here in Chicago. So with all that said, hello to you, Euan Hague. Glad to have you.
Thanks, Michael. Nice to be on the show.
So last time you were on, we talked about the Neo-Confederacy, a book that you have turned out. But, you know, you're a busy guy. And one of the things that I noticed with my little cell phone was that you were participating in a Black Panther bus tour. Why don't you tell us about what that was all about, what you saw, etc.?
Yeah, so this was a tour organized on the 22nd of June, so last week, by the Historical Preservation Society of the Illinois Black Panther Party. The tour leader was Layla Wills, and she has been involved in an effort for about the last 4 or 5 years to have sites associated with the Illinois Black Panther Party recognized on the National Register of Historic Places. And that application that the Historical Preservation Society, the Illinois Black Panther Party, submitted was recognized in December of 2023. And so they have been raising money. They are now going to be putting markers on sites around the city and to highlight the work of the Illinois Black Panther Party. And I was fortunate to go on their inaugural bus tour of these sites this past weekend, along with a number of, as well as Ms. Wills, a number of former or current Panthers, including former Congressman Bobby Rush. I spoke with a woman called Lonnie Hall. And so it was an opportunity for about 40, 45 people this past weekend to learn more about the Black Panther Party here in Chicago in particular, although their efforts are statewide. I should just, if people are interested in this project, they should go to ilbpp.org. That is the organization, ilbpp.org. And they have a number of interactive maps on the website, some great archival material, and really interesting to learn more about what the Illinois Black Panther Party was doing, particularly between 1968 and 1974. They were the kind of period highlighted by the tour and by the organization.
So Euan, did you show up some spot and get on a bus? And was it a public bus, a city bus, a rented bus, a Panther bus? The Panthers used to run buses down to prisons. You know, they had a program where they would bring families to visit their loved ones who were incarcerated back in the day.
Yeah, this was a tour organized by the Historic Preservation Society. So it was a bus tour, a private bus. And we started at 1512 South Pulaski, which is a current site of the Better Boys Foundation. And the reason we started there is because back in the late 1960s, it was a boxing gym. And it was one of the first locations where the Illinois Black Panther Party had one of its survival programs, one of the Serve the People programs. It was one of their breakfast programs, led by a friend of both of our, one of the people who was involved in that was a friend of both of ours, Mike, a guy called Billy Brooks, was one of the people who helped set that. He wasn't on the tour; he was not available, but helped set up that breakfast party. So we met there, and then we drove just a couple of blocks to the former site of the Spurgeon Jake Winters People's Health Center, which is at 3850 West 16th Street, where, as you know, one of the key things around this period in the late 1960s, early 1970s, was a lack of access to healthcare, and a number of organizations, including the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, groups on the north side, such as your own organization, Rising Up Angry, the Young Patriots, for a short time, put together these people's health clinics. And so we stopped there, learned a little bit about the people's Spurgeon Jake Winters People's Health Center, and across the street at Penn Elementary, which is still standing, was one of the first sites to be testing for sickle cell anemia. And so I think one of the things that really came across from the tour was the efforts of the Black Panther Party to provide community services to residents in this was in North Lawndale.
Yeah, we each year we bring Billy Brooks into our classes, and he talks a lot about what the Panthers did. And you mentioned the health clinics, all those organizations, the Young Lords, the Young Patriots, Rising Up Angry, and the Black Panther Party all had health clinics. The one that was closest to DePaul and was probably I like to say the most advanced was the Fritzie Engelstein Free People's Health Center at Wilton Diversey and the Church of the Holy Covenant. And that was mainly run by Rising Up Angry people back in the day. But you do point out how not only did all these communities lack decent health care and services, but also in the case of the Black community, a lot was the sickle cell anemia, which was really going on. I don't think many of us had known much about it and how prevalent it was.
Right. Yeah, it was really good. We then moved on from those sites to the site of the former headquarters of the Black Panther Party at 2350 West Madison, which is now a Walgreens. That whole area is completely redeveloped. And then we got off the bus and walked around the block, literally 1 block away to 2337 West Monroe, where, of course, Fred Hampton was assassinated on the night of the 4th of December, 1969. And it's really interesting to hear the memories of former Congressman Rush and other members of the party. And I actually spoke with Lonnie Hall at that site, and as well as understanding the legacy of the death of the murder of Fred Hampton, but just recognizing the complete transformation, the ability to walk through the neighborhood and just see the complete transformation of it. I think there's probably only one building at that intersection of between Madison and Monroe, the 2300 block, that was there back in the 1960s. Almost everything else is new. And so that's one of the challenges, I think, that the Historical Preservation Society of the Illinois Black Panther Party is facing. As with a lot of these sites where we try to commemorate the past, is a lot of the buildings are gone and a lot of the sites are vacant. And one of the challenges then becomes, how do you preserve a history that's been erased from the physical landscape, not erased from people's memories or from literature, from texts, but certainly from the physical landscape. And then from there we moved on to 201 South Ashland, the People's Church, which is where a number of organizations held events and rallies. It's now the Epiphany Center for the Arts, and it's where Fred Hampton did his last major public speech before his assassination. He did a speech there on the 3rd of December, 1969. And after that was when he was killed in the raid organized by the Cook County State's Attorney.
Yeah, Edward Hanrahan, along with the FBI.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things I should point out, if people are interested, on Wednesday, the 7th of August at 6 p.m. at the Epiphany Center for the Arts, formerly the People's Church, 201 South Ashland, there's going to be a reception and an exhibition of the historic Illinois Black Panther Historic Preservation Society. There's going to be an exhibit. So that's on the Wednesday, the 7th of August.
You know, you talk about the kind of erasing of the physical geography, the buildings. That's actually something that we've observed with we take this class called Activists and Activism since 1960, and we take them on a couple of field trips. We go to Uptown, We go to Lincoln Park, where Uptown was where the young Joint Community Union was, and then the Young Patriots. And then the Young Lords were in Lincoln Park. And in both of those neighborhoods, just like you talk about in the neighborhood that got revitalized back a few years back, I think it was 96 when the Democratic Convention, the previous one to the one that's coming up, they did a lot of renovation out there and tore down a lot of things. But in Lincoln Park, the church that we're at the corner of Kenmore and Armitage.
It's 834 West Armitage.
It's now a Walgreens.
Yeah.
And in Uptown, where the Goodfellows were and where there was a lot of action on Wilson Avenue, that's been a lot of renovation. Is everywhere, apparently. And it's a good thing that we're trying to figure a way to keep people aware of what had gone on in these neighborhoods in the past.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues with historic preservation is historically, historic preservation has been primarily about famous people like presidents or authors disproportionately commemorating white men, and also architecture. And it's never really, historic preservation has never really been about the activism, community organizing, protests from the bottom up, challenges to authority, and so forth. So there's a whole alternative landscape of historic preservation out there that is ripe for reconsideration. And I think this is one of the great things, like a group like the Historic Preservation Society, the Illinois Black Panther Party. On our own campus at DePaul, a number of faculty and students have been pushing for almost 10 years to get memorial plaques and markers recognizing the role of the Puerto Rican organization, the Young Lords organization, who were very active on the property on and around our campus. It was formerly the McCormick Theological Seminary, but now it's part of our DePaul University School of Music. So we're going to have a ceremony soon to be marking and identifying those locations. But I think one of the things that I put my other hat on at the moment with my professor of geography hat. But one of the things that the internet has given us in the last decade or so is the ability for high quality interactive maps online. And that's another way that people are recognizing and marking these pasts that are so often raised by having these alternative atlases online where you can make a thematic interactive map, just like the Historic Preservation Society of the Illinois Black Panther Party has done, where you can actually find these locations. And I think that's really important, because one of the things that often gets lost in the redevelopment is where places are and how people would have negotiated that urban landscape to raise their voices, to challenge authority, to try to make a change and try to make a difference. One thing that struck me on the tour was just how near the Black Panther free health people's health clinic was to the boxing gym where they did the free breakfast. I mean, I knew the addresses in my head. I could look on a map, but literally just driving around the corner and seeing how close together these locations were, was interesting. And then I think we actually finished over on the south side, over at 4233 South Indiana, which was the second office of the Illinois Black Panther Party. And then we turned the corner around from there, and we stopped at the church where Emmett Till's open casket was, which for a long time stood unmarked, but now is on the National Register of Historic Places. So again, sort of beginning to write this civil rights history into Chicago's landscape. For a long time, there was no recognition of Martin Luther King's residence here in Chicago. Now, in the last 10 years, we've had a statue and sort of commemoration built at Marquette Park. Obviously, the apartment that King lived in at the time on the west side has been demolished, but now there's a new development there. The King condominiums, the King apartments. We drove past it on the tour. But I think for a long time, and this is something, Mike, you'll know from when we teach the students complain that we take them to see empty lots. And that's one of the challenges is how do you impress on the next generation the importance of the work that was done in buildings that are no longer there? And I think, that's an interesting challenge.
Let me jump in and for people who may not know the details of a couple of things, tell people about Emmett Till briefly. And then I also want to go back to DePaul's campus.
Yeah, so Emmett Till, and many people will know, was actually, we learned on the tour that Fred Hampton's mom babysat for Emmett Till, and therefore Fred Hampton and Emmett Till knew each other, albeit Till was a little older than Fred Hampton when they were children. But Till was murdered, I believe, in Mississippi in the mid 1950s. He'd been sent, like so many families of African American descent who moved to Chicago from Mississippi. They came up the Illinois Central Railroad, which in those days terminated Roosevelt and Michigan, and then came from Mississippi and up the railroad into Chicago, and then occupied the South Side. And quite often that children of these migrants would go back to stay with relatives in the summer. And Till was, his body, he was alleged to have whistled or made a suggestive remark towards a white woman. And as a teenager, he was found murdered in the Tallahatchie River.
We had his cousin who was in the room when they came and pulled him out, and he was on the Live from the Heartland show. Okay. And I do think we have Katie Hogan, who sometimes comes on and is one of the producers. She has a tape of that.
One of the most famous things, though, was that his mom allowed at his funeral, his mom allowed the visitation of the open casket. And this was widely photographed. And this was in Chicago where we stopped. And this was widely carried in the press, and particularly in the black press, which is, of course, very prevalent here in Chicago as well. And that really kind of brought the threats and the threats to African Americans and the importance of the civil rights movement into the national spotlight, particularly when the white men who had murdered him were exonerated in a very quick trial with an all-white jury, and then actually, I think, almost bragged about it afterwards. I don't remember the details exactly. So that was it sort of again showed that Till's murder and Fred Hampton's murder are 15 years apart almost, and they're parts of the same efforts to struggle to challenge white supremacy, structural racism, and make a difference in our society through advancing civil rights.
Yeah, we're at a time when we thought, I'm doing some writing on a number of fronts, and one of the things I was doing yesterday was just talking about the hope we had back in the day and how now we have a kind of a rising tide of fascism, not only in this country, but around the world. And I think it's really important that those of us who are, for peace, justice, harmony, et cetera, really get the word out. Let me ask you, Euan Hague, who was on the tour with you on this bus? What sort of people? Academics, neighborhood people, activists, white, black, Latino, et cetera?
Well, firstly, I should correct myself. Till's body was the open casket, the Roberts Temple Church of God in Christ, 4021 South State, if anyone's interested in going to see that location. Who was on the bus? Well, there was a number. It was people familiar with the Illinois Black Panther Party, former members of the party, their friends and relatives. There was some other academics there, people from the preservation community. I spoke to one woman who's involved in efforts to preserve historic sites in Oak Park. And so there's sort of a general effort to raise awareness of sites associated with the Illinois Black Panther Party. So it was a group of people who I think have been probably following this process at ilbpp.org. and we're interested to take this inaugural bus tour. I believe there's plans for future tours, so I think if you look online, you'll be able to find out more about them.
Well, Euan, I really want to thank you for coming on and talking about this. I would have liked to have gone on the tour, but I didn't sign up, and I think I was in El Paso, so it wouldn't have worked. It's a good thing, and I'm glad you did it. And I'm always grateful for your information and your accounting of events. And when you make a quick mistake, you're right there correcting it on addresses, etc. Well, I was going to ask you about the British elections coming up. I was going to ask you about soccer coming up, but according to our engineer, Hal James, we're out of time. So we're going to take a musical break. We're going to thank Euan Hague for coming on, take a musical break, and we'll be right back with Pat Handlin of the People's Law Office talking about pipelines and what's going on since we saw a lot of demonstrations about the Dakota Access Pipeline a few years back, and she's going to update us on where that's all now. So take a deep breath and listen to some tune, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland. This is for the week of June 29th. And we had a good talk with our friend Euan Hague, and now we're looking forward to another good talk with our friend Pat Handlin. Pat has been a guest on this show before. A lot of it has been talking about pipelines, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Dakota Access Pipeline, which people remember in 2016. There were a lot of demonstrations around it, and Pat will fill us in on what that was about. And then we're going to take a look at another pipeline over here in Lake Michigan under the Straits of Mackinac. What is that one called?
Line 5.
Line 5.
Enbridge Line 5.
So we're talking Dakota Access Pipeline and Enbridge Line 5 pipeline. So good day to you, Pat Handlin.
Hello. Hi, Michael James.
Good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay,
Good to see you.
You got back to me. I know I always am asking you to get a hold of me if you got some information you want to share, and you did it. And I was so glad when people actually seek me out for coming on the show. And why don't you start filling us in on the pipeline question?
Okay. So you remember, of course, and I'm sure all of your listeners remember the Standing Rock protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. They were, there were probably 15,000 people there in North Dakota. And unfortunately, because Trump was elected, the pipeline, it had been shut down, at least temporarily. And it went forward, and oil's been flowing through it to southern Illinois. All these years since early 2017. This is just a recap. The federal district court in Washington said that the Army Corps of Engineers had failed to do a proper environmental impact statement when they allowed Energy Transfer, the company that built and runs it, the pipeline, the DePaul, that they had failed to do a proper environmental impact statement. And that was because the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe sued in federal court. They've really led this fight. And so The judge ultimately, after several years of litigation, said, yes, you're right. They did not do a proper environmental impact statement. He found that the easement allowing the pipeline to flow under the Missouri River was illegal, not properly done. He vacated it, and he ordered the flow of oil to stop. That was appealed. The appellate court said, yes, you're right. The Army Corps of Engineers failed to do a proper environmental impact statement. We uphold your decision to vacate the easement, allowing it to go under the Missouri River. But there isn't enough information in the record to uphold your injunction ordering the flow of oil to stop. So it has continued.
What does easement mean?
An easement
what does vacate mean?
Okay, easement is like legal. People have easements like a driveway across somebody else's land.
Right.
That's an easement. It's not ownership, but it allows you to use it. Land, it's related to land. This is related to the land under the river, to the river. And vacate means to say that it doesn't exist any longer. It's not a valid legal document. And it never was.
So it's been vacated, but it hasn't stopped the flow of oil.
Exactly. And so the Army Corps of Engineers is conducting a new environmental impact statement. They haven't decided yet in the last year and a half whether or not they should stop the flow of oil, which they could do. However, here's the new information. It's not really new. It's new to us, new to the public, that in October 2021, Energy Transfer was charged with two separate criminal cases involving 48 environmental crimes by the Attorney General of Pennsylvania in relation to their construction of a pipeline in Pennsylvania during 2017, the same year that they did the horizontal directional drilling under the Missouri River. So, and the criminal environmental crimes are for, quote, repeatedly contaminating our lakes, rivers, streams, and groundwater with drilling fluid from 21 drill sites across Pennsylvania. So when you go under a river, they do what they call horizontal directional drilling. They go deep under the river and they have to drill a hole to put the pipes through. And they use drilling, what they call drilling fluid or drilling mud. So the Energy Transfer, this is more from Pennsylvania, failed to report environmental damages and criminal use of unapproved additives in the drilling fluid, which included things like diesel fuel. So they basically poured diesel fuel into people's well water, into rivers, into groundwater in Pennsylvania. So they entered a no contest plea, which resulted in a conviction on all 48, and they were ordered to pay $10 million to make the water sources that were most damaged cleaner and safer. But that's not the end. So based on that, the Environmental Protection Agency in October 2022 issued what's called a notice of debarment, 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 which I had not known about previous to this, that prevents Energy Transfer, the company that owns and continues to operate the Dakota Access Pipeline through which oil flows, which prevents them from pursuing or renewing federal government contracts or federal financial assistance agreements. So it means that they couldn't get a contract to clean government buildings. They can't get a contract with the federal government to do anything. So the question is an easement a contract? I don't know. Can they get a new new easement or new authority to maintain the flow of oil under the Missouri River. I mean, I think that's something that will ultimately, hopefully, be litigated. But the debarment and what they did in Pennsylvania was really appalling, in my mind. And also, and they didn't, they hid it. They didn't reveal it. It was found by the folks in Pennsylvania who were impacted. So then and that's not all. Believe it or not.
Keep it coming.
So in December 2021, Energy Transfer was the subject of proceedings initiated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, also known as FERC, FERC, for similar conduct involving drilling fluid during horizontal directional drilling operations under the, I'm gonna butcher the name of this river, Tuscarawas River in Ohio, when, and quote, a large inadvertent release of 2 million gallons of drilling mud reached the ground surface and flowed into a protected nearby wetland. Testing conducted by the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency revealed the presence of petroleum hydrocarbons consistent with, guess what? Diesel fuel.
Wow.
Sound familiar? Also, hydraulic oil and non-toxic but unapproved lubricants to combat drilling difficulties and keep up with drilling progress demands. So FERC ordered a penalty of $40 million in that case. But that's what's called a rule to show cause. So Energy Transfer has an opportunity to respond. But, it's significant that the government has taken these steps and that Energy Transfer has been caught, in the Midwest doing these really awful things to the land and water.
Let me ask you, is there any pushback? Is it a political issue in like North Dakota between a Republican, kind of a pretty heavy red state, and this cause of ending the pipeline going under the Missouri River? And the same would be true in possibly, when we have a federal government now, which is in the hands of the Democrats on one level. But I'm just wondering what's the pushback, even in Ohio, from like red state advocate types, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, North Dakota is actually a very, some people in North Dakota, I mean, obviously the tribe has land in North Dakota and South Dakota. Yeah. And originally they're what's called unceded territory included almost all of North Dakota, South Dakota, the Black Hills, Montana. That's a whole other interesting story that I would highly recommend people read, because for a number of years, the Lakota, which is what the Sioux's name has been, not in English, they controlled much of that. They controlled it. They won military battles against the U.S. military. But anyway, that's another story, an important one. But but right now these actions are taken by the federal government. So the state government really doesn't have much to say about these actions by the Environmental Protection Agency, the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So they really can't push back. Although, if Burgum becomes Trump's vice presidential nominee, he's a big oil and gas man in terms of supporting it. I don't know what his financial interests are, but Trump also, once he took office the last time he was elected, one of the first things he did was to approve the completion of the Dakota Access Pipeline, direct the Army Corps of Engineers to approve them going under the Missouri River, because they hadn't yet done that.
So what's happening now? Their Energy Transfer, this company, they have a right to appeal this decision.
Well, they pled no contest to the Pennsylvania environmental charges. So that's a done deal. They cannot appeal I guess they probably can appeal the Environmental Protection Agency debarment, but they have, in 3 years, they can ask that it be overturned.
So we'll wait and see on all that. And oil, right now, the oil continues to flow.
It continues to flow.
And let me ask you briefly before we go on to talking about close to home up in Michigan and this, with the Enbridge Line 5. Let me just ask you, you were out there during the Dakota Access Pipeline demonstrations. And
yes,
just give us a little brief description of the spirit of the people and the demonstrations.
It was one of the most the word that comes into my mind is compelling, but that's not even, it was one of the most moving things I've ever experienced actually in my life, which was because just the feeling in the camp was so welcoming, and there was so much camaraderie. People made food for each other. There were tents where food was made. They followed the Lakota principles of being, which include generosity, and so it was great. It was difficult. The law enforcement was incredibly violent.
Yeah.
A lot of people were very harmed. And I went back for several years representing more than 800 people were charged with misdemeanors. And some people were charged with felonies. But we won most of those cases because, they were flawed to begin with. And but I watched a lot of even though I wasn't at a lot of the demonstrations, I watched a lot of the video to prepare for the cases. And, it's just like law enforcement, there were videos of people being pepper sprayed in the face and, just really kind of horrendous stuff like that.
Well, Pat Handlin, let's keep talking about pipe.
Okay.
Let's switch over close to home. We've got a thing known as the Enbridge Line 5. It runs through Wisconsin, through land of the Bad River Band.
The Lake Superior, Chippewa, right.
It also runs under the Straits of Mackinac. And
exactly.
So there's a lot of pushback on it from the state of Michigan and a number of tribes there.
Right.
Fill us in on what's going on with that, because I first heard about that from our sometimes co-host producer, Katie Hogan. She was all over that, and we did talk about it on the show. What do you got now on the challenge?
Okay, so that's being challenged in two different places. In the state of Michigan by the Attorney General and the Governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor. I mean, she's been challenging this since 2020.
Like her. I think she wants to run for president next time.
Yeah. I mean, this time would be better, but hey, what are you going to do? And and the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, who are in Wisconsin, they've challenged it also. They filed in 2019. So in both cases, two separate judges, same line 5. It comes from Canada, from the tar sands of Canada, which is the dirtiest oil on the planet, through Wisconsin into Michigan and back into Canada. And it's 71 years old. So, So initially, the Bad River Band had allowed an easement across their land. But the pipe's been operating for more than 10 years, I think 13 years actually more than that, a number of years without authority of the Bad River Band. They refused to renew the easement allowing the pipeline to go through their land. And part of the reason they did that was because there's a river, the Medicine River, that's had a lot of, where the pipe is located, has had a lot of erosion. And last year it was within 11 feet of the pipe. So there's a real substantial risk of the pipe failing and dumping oil into that river and onto the land of the Bad River Band. So their lawsuit, so I'm going to leave that and then go to Michigan. So in Michigan, in 2020, a judge in Michigan state court, entered an injunction in a case filed by Dana Nessel, the Attorney General of Michigan, entering a temporary restraining order, ordering the pipeline shut down, ordering them to stop the flow of oil. Did they do that? No. I mean, no, they didn't. So they appealed it. They didn't appeal it in the state court. They tried to have the case removed from state court to federal court. And that ended up being appealed to the federal appellate court that includes Michigan, the Sixth Circuit. And the Sixth Circuit just entered an order returning the case to the Michigan State Court. So that's the update on the Michigan case. I mean, that just happened, which is a very good thing, because the judge has already issued an injunction. Now the complication, the Bad River Band's case goes to the Seventh Circuit, a different federal appellate court. The Bad River Band filed in federal court, and they got an injunction also from the federal district judge, ordering that the pipeline be removed from their land in 2026. Not that it be shut down immediately, but that it be shut down and removed in 2026. The judge found that the Enbridge had done a conscious and willful trespass over their land. And he also put in some other, contingencies in if the erosion became worse and there was an even greater risk than there existed last year. So that was appealed to the Seventh Circuit. And the Seventh Circuit heard arguments in February of this year. And they wanted the U.S. government to weigh in on it because there's a pipeline treaty between the U.S. and Canada. So right now the U.S. is between treaties. They've got two treaties which are at this point inconsistent with each other because Canada wants their 71-year-old pipeline that's threatening the Bad River Band territory with a huge oil spill and a spill under the Straits of Mackinac, which would do incredible harm to Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, land that's sacred. So 33 tribes have filed what's called amicus curiae briefs together, supporting shutdown of this pipeline. And so now we have to wait and see what the Seventh Circuit will do in Wisconsin.
Well, so we're going to have to wait and see on both these pipelines to see when the oil flow stops. And let's hope
it does.
We hope it does. And on a global or on a broader sense, we've got to, you said at the outset of the show before we started, actually, you said we need to shut down oil and gas completely.
We do.
Give me a minute on that.
Well, global warming, I mean, I don't think there are many people who question that the planet is warming.
Even Republicans are starting to see it.
I mean, when Texas, yeah, exactly. People in Texas, people in the Central Plains. I mean, people across the country. How can people not acknowledge that the storms that are happening were predicted by scientists, climate scientists, many years ago, and what they predicted would happen because of the warming planet is happening. So, and the reason for climate change is burning of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think Biden has done well is to encourage to encourage wind and solar.
Yeah. And electric cars.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean that every place somebody wants to put a mine, it should happen, or every place somebody wants to put a windmill, it should happen. But it means that, there are farmers in Wisconsin and Indiana who are getting paid rent by the companies that put pipelines on their land, and they can still farm. So we just have no alternative to shutting down the oil and gas industry. And I just learned yesterday that at this point, the U.S. is producing more oil and gas than any other country in the world.
We are.
More than Saudi Arabia.
We're running out of time, and I
Okay.
want to thank you for contacting me and giving us this update. I know that a number of people who listen or watch this show are really environmentally conscious and active in their own ways to try to change the situation. And you clearly are doing good, and we appreciate that. So keep up the good work. And
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody who's been listening or viewing this show, however you get it. We're here every week. We are in our summertime fundraising mode, so please contact us at livefromtheheartlandshow@gmail.com if you want to contribute. Next week, we're going to have our state representative, Kelly Cassidy, and we're going to have the former track coach at Loyola and DePaul and other places, Gordon Thompson, coming on and talking about the Olympics. I want to thank everybody who makes the show possible. Hal James, our engineer, our producers, Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman. I want to thank our guests, Pat Handlin and Euan Hague. And I encourage you all to continue to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Pat, Flint, everybody on that front. All our friends are doing. Keep it up. We got a long way to go. We got a lot of challenges, but we can do it. We just can't stop. See you next week. Over and out. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21, or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM, or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpin Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpinradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing